Welcome back to day 2 of the WCEF Online. Now, yesterday we looked at the possibilities that circular economy provides for sustainable recovery and how the new European Green Deal plays an important role in the transition to a CE. And also how the pandemic has affected the circular ambitions of corporations and what the path to a CE might look like in Canada and the US specifically. So if you missed any of the sessions, you can find them online. Today, we'll continue exploring the challenges and opportunities in the COVID-19 recovery. Throughout today's sessions, we will also look at the enabling conditions like policy, finance, and in the next session, the important role of partnerships. However, I think, Tim, we will pick up where we left off yesterday with a regional deep dive into the continent where it all began, the fastest growing continent and also one of the most diverse, Africa.
Indeed, and central to the circular economy is the idea that diversity builds resilience. The pandemic has laid bare the consequences and the drawbacks of our linear economy, which rather than being diverse has often put all the eggs in one basket. But we can learn more from nature where there's no waste, only food for other organisms. I've seen this in coffee systems in Ethiopia where all parts of the coffee are valorized. And the same logic is being used in South Africa to develop alternative proteins. In essence, the circular economy marries the traditional with the modern. And with digital technology, we can get more value from less by unlocking access to underused assets. And if digitalization will be key, then we can expect much from Africa with the world's youngest population. And like our speaker from UNEP, Inger Andersen, mentioned yesterday, we shouldn't underestimate the potential of tech-savvy youth. There are also challenges, many connected to COVID-19, which has seen, for instance, South Africa's economy shrink by as much as half. We'll also cover that side in today's session, which will be hosted by the African Circular Economy Alliance, which will soon transfer the broadcast to.
And just a reminder of some technical instructions. You are watching this broadcast live via the WCEF online event platform. The platform provides access to all relevant information. Please do keep the chat busy, challenge us with questions, and above all, keep making connections.
And we'll now hear we'll have the opening remarks from our first speaker, Dr. Joy Katagekwa. It's great to have you with us. Dr. Joy Katagekwa is the strategic advisor to the Assistant Administrator and Director at the United Nations Development Program's Regional Africa Bureau. UNDP is a strategic partner of the African Circular Economy Alliance as well, I should say. And Dr. Katagekwa, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed. Good morning from New York, and it's a pleasure to be with you today to make a contribution. I'm very proud to be associated with this conversation because for me, it holds the promise of putting meat on the bones on the question of how we can promote sustainability in our production and consumption processes. I grew up in Uganda. And from the time as a little child at Makerere University, I always recall this man that came, screaming, "Chupa debe, chupa debe." And that was his call for us to give him our plastics, our bottles, our glass, our tins. And in exchange for that, he would give us some money. Those were the opportunities to buy some sweets. I always wondered what he wanted to do with the rubbish, because we considered it rubbish. And yet we secretly liked when he came, because it was in there that we could buy sweets. If you told me 17 years ago that I'd be making a case for why environmental considerations should be at the heart of how we design trade, investment, production, industrial policy, I'd have said you need to put it in the right box. At the time, we argued a lot for the need to get environmental considerations out of the way so that trade could play its role for development. I think we've turned a circle on that, centering environmental considerations, centering sustainability, and ensuring that everything must work around meeting those objectives. And so it's a great place to be right now. And circularity sits very well in there, because as I said, it points to this question of solutions, including for Africa. So I would like to make 3 points today. And the points are really that, one, if we invest in circularity in the right way in Africa, we are developing, we are increasing, we're lifting the development performance of the continent. That's the first point. The second point I'd like to make is COVID leaves us no choice. Many will say it has set us back, but I think it's the opportunity for a strong reset, and I'd like to explain that. And then the third point really that I'd like to make today is that it makes business sense. It makes market sense, and it can be profitable as well, including many people and the informal sector. So coming back to the first point, the development lift, when we look at the numbers, they tell us $4.5 trillion as an opportunity in terms of investing more in circularity. What that means, $4.5 trillion. When you look at the 90 billion tons of material we used last year to meet our functional needs as the human race, only 8.6 was cycled back into the economy. And this was a downward trend from the 2018 numbers. This tells us that there is an opportunity to go upwards. There's an opportunity to invest upward, to create those jobs in the circular economy. The ILO tells us these numbers can be up to 50 million jobs in the case of services and 45 million in the case of waste management. And so there is a potential, there is an opportunity, because behind that is not just the numbers that you see from ILO, because many times those numbers would not tackle the informality, the chupa-debes around the enterprise of this story. And so the opportunity is huge, is immense. So that's the first point. The second point is that COVID leaves us no choice. And I think Africa has had to learn the hard way about the risks, the problems of not putting a strong foot on the pedal of industrial policy, of thinking it is safe to import all of your needs. With disrupted production chains, disrupted supply chains, the argumentation is now very clear that we must shorten those supply chains. We must build regional value chains, because in here are the jobs of the women, of the youth, of the now and of the future. So we have an opportunity in the reset context to do it the right way, to look at the recovery strategies with a lens of circularity. And so as we look towards revamping our economies, we need to look at it from a lens of circularity. And so the third point I'd say is, well, but there are no markets. It doesn't really make market sense. We can't really make the money. Not quite. Africa has never been more united in terms of its interest in trade integration than it is right now. Before, we talked a lot about the high tariff walls that made it impossible for the continent to trade with each other. With the African Continental Free Trade Area, we're in a new place. A promise of up to 97% of tariff lines reduced to make sure, zero rated, to make sure that trade can move across borders. And we already know that there's a huge opportunity in there, currently 18%, but within that 18%, a rich tapestry of value added products. And so I would say 1.2 billion people, $3.4 trillion economy, the market is there. We just must make sure that circularity is ingrained therein. And so I'd like to close by coming back to Chupa Debe, the man that motivated me to think about circularity at a very tender age as a young girl in Uganda. What does he tell us about solutions? At least 4 things. 1, we must build the partnerships that are critical to ensure that circularity includes everybody. These partnerships are critical. You must think about SMEs, you must think about big business, and you must think about the informal sector as well, to create those impactful partnerships where there's something in there for everybody. The second point would be behavior change, that we must understand that the inputs into circularity require for us to provide them through our choices in what we buy, through our choices in how we keep it, through our choices in how we separate the produce that we deal with. The third point is finance. Trade finance, investment finance, production finance has always been the lifeline of business. And therefore investing in, and I'm very happy that the AFDB is associated with this, because it is that bank that has made a critical, clear distinction in terms of its investment priorities to build Africa. So that's a critical one. The fourth point, and I will end there, is over 35 years ago, the Chupa Debe story was about a man. Here we are, still asking this question: how many women are involved? And how do we ensure that there are women who go beyond the Chupa Debe story and build strong, powerful businesses in the circular economy? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Katagekwa. I think that story really speaks to me, and I really like how you ended it with the role of women in this context. You have made it clear that this is an opportunity, and we have no choice now with COVID-19, and this is a chance to look at the recovery through a circularity lens, and partnerships, behaviors, and finance will be key in this context. And also, we'll pick up on what you mentioned on the African Development Bank later as well. We'll now continue with the opportunities and requirements for a circular economy in Africa with our next speaker, which I'm delighted to welcome, Vandira Mathai. She's the Vice President and Regional Director of the World Resources Institute Africa, I should also mention that she's the chair of the Wangari Maathai Foundation and the former chair of the Green Belt Movement in Kenya, which her mother, the Nobel Peace Prize laureate Wangari Maathai, founded. And it's a really great honor to have you here, Vandira Mathai. The screen is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that very kind introduction, and delighted to be here to share some framing remarks. Antonia, my childhood was also part of the Chupa Debe, and I remember so warmly exactly what you've described. But we are actually living in very interesting times now, aren't we? I've been struck by the fact that in these short 10 months that we've been in this pandemic, the context of the work that we all do and the task ahead has become clearer somewhat, more urgent, but it has not become any easier. The context of everything that Antonia mentioned, the road ahead, is framed with uncertainty, inequity, and a deep dose of urgency. However we choose to shape this narrative, it has got to start with the idea that people, poverty, and inequality are at the heart of how we must bounce back and face the disruptions that we are facing at the moment. And this is not just a once-in-a-generation reset. It is a once-in-a-century reset, defined really by 4 trends, which we've already had. The first that I want to highlight is inequality, because it is linked to a deep crisis in justice around the world. We've seen it in the US, the Black Lives Matter, the anti-Black sentiment around the world, but also injustice in how climate change is managed and being managed, how injustice in trade is manifesting, and certainly in supply chain and market transparency or lack of it. All of these will stifle our collective ability to transform, even with magical movements like this one. Second, we have, of course, COVID-19, which is now in its second round in many parts of the world, the worst pandemic in our lifetimes. We also have the worst economic downturn we've ever faced, exacerbated, I think, uniquely by the fact that it's happening around the world simultaneously. And finally, of course, climate change, an issue that continues to shape our future and to which our ultimate survival as a human family actually depends. I'm inspired by the words Nelson Mandela used. He said, it's not where you start, but how high you aim that actually matters. So we must aim high with the change we seek in the world, certainly tackling systemic transformations that are needed. I'm delighted that the ambition of the circular economy and circularity in these movements is exactly what is needed. We will shortly hear, of course, many solutions around what we can actually do, because we are focused on action. But given the limits, I want to focus on just one that was even introduced a little bit earlier. The call to action for Africa, certainly, and the rest of the world is simple. We have got to deliver hope and economic transformation to the youth demographic among us. Our youth, and I'm talking about 18 to 35 and thereabouts, are and will be the drivers of innovation. They will also be the drivers of the many agendas we've set for ourselves on international platforms. I'm struck always, the median age of Africa today, 19 years old. These are the change agents. We must empower and activate them through movements like this one. And the role of the political economy in creating the necessary transparency in supply chains and incentivizing the engagement of young people cannot be underscored. If we have this much political economy and political will, we will have this much transformation. Let's make that a critical piece of how we move forward. For that reason, and certainly for many others, I'm inspired by the potential of the circular economy, for why we at WRI are also proud to host PACE and support the partners around the Africa Circular Economy Alliance. The circular economy is a positive narrative and a way to reframe our relationship with nature. And by repositioning how we think about how we use resources, we must and we can empower people, communities to use their resources. And as we've heard, actually, to rediscover elements of our culture where we actually already did so. And so many times that culture has been suppressed. And so perhaps this is about restoring some of those elements of our culture that fostered circularity. And at a bilateral and multilateral levels, I believe we can leverage existing momentum as we look forward to a low carbon circular future. I also want to mention that I was inspired by the AMCEN Bureau and the fact that they're developing a green stimulus program for Africa to contribute to the overall post-COVID-19 recovery. Great that it is in line with the targets contained in Agenda 2063 and also Agenda 2030, looking at the improvement of chemical and waste management and the circular economy, and how we anchor this truly and meaningfully will be the task ahead. In closing, I have been inspired by the fact that coded in our cultures and in cultures around the world is this concept of circularity. Antonia shared the example from East Africa, Chuba Nandebe. I want to share another concept, just because, you know, it is around the world. I learned around 15 years ago when I visited Japan with my mother. She triggered a national movement in that country around a concept that is embedded in circularity. And it's one coded in the cultural wisdom of the Japanese, a concept that some of you may have heard of, mottainai, an ancient Japanese concept that in those tiny 3 words means reuse, reduce, recycle. But it goes a little bit further. It's reduce, reuse, recycle with gratitude and respect. Today, the Mottainai campaign in Japan promotes this deep tradition within the children and the young people that they may have this 3R embedded in their lives and in everything they do, including how they eat and avoid waste, but they do so with gratitude and respect. May we discover the coded wisdom in our cultures that makes this part of a truly transformative revolution. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join you today.
Well, thank you, Wanjira Maathai. Certainly inspirational what we heard already from our 2 previous speakers, and just to quote you and remind everyone else, certainly this is a once in a generation opportunity to reset, to correct the deep inequality and injustice of the world. That was quite something, and I'm looking forward to hearing more soon. But we want to get our viewers and audience going as well, and we have a short poll for you. And just as a reminder that you will find the poll and the votes opportunity to vote in the chat box. Just press the vote button after you've made your choice. And the first poll question is, what do you consider to be the key areas, themes that present the most opportunities to a circular economy in Africa? And let's see what happens if this is a test that everyone's awake and live online.
Oh, there we go.
And now we see things happening.
Oh, it's a bit early to tell. It's a mixed bag so
but
far.
Water and sanitation, plastic and packaging, food and agriculture, yes. They're spreading out nicely, the votes. The key, I think, are food and agriculture, plastics, water, and as a service, I believe.
So, and keep the votes coming.
Absolutely, because we will be collecting this data and sharing it back to you as well. So thank you for participating.
And we'll, in fact, look more at the opportunities next, where we'll hear about what the circular economy means for the whole continent. And working together will indeed be key here. And I think Yuval Noah Harari has articulated quite neatly that large-scale cooperation depends on believing in common stories. And I think it's really fair to say that we had two brilliant storytellers as keynotes. Got me really excited, and you set the bar really high for the panel and our moderator, James Mwange, which I'm delighted to introduce now, also an excellent storyteller. And I should say that James Mwange is the host of the African Circular Economy Alliance and the executive director of the Dahlberg Group. James Mwange, I believe you're with us from South Africa's largest city, and we look forward to hearing what you have in store for us today.
Thank you, Tim. And good morning, everyone. I am actually in Nairobi. I am a former resident of Johannesburg, and I love that city, but now operating from Nairobi. And a bit in awe, going after two powerful voices from African women driving this agenda of the circular economy and putting us to the test. We have a task in front of us, which is to move beyond talk and move towards action in terms of creating the types of systemic economic changes that will allow us to really embrace the power of the circular economy. In this conversation today, the hope is to go from opportunity to action, and really the partnerships, highlighting those areas where people either speaking today or in the audience or listening in can plug in and engage. This is not a talk shop. And with that, we have an amazing set of voices around the table, from the private sector, public sector, the finance community, and really at the analytical and an academic perspective on what's going on. So without further ado, we will dig right into the conversation and hopefully identify those spaces where we move from talk to action. And I'll start with Dr. Patrick Masije, who is the Regional Coordinator for Resource Efficiency at the UN Environmental Program. And Patrick, Wanjira made a very clear tie to the climate crisis, the climate emergency that we're all facing. From the perspective of UNEP, as within the UN system, a custodian of the climate, it would be great for you to speak a little bit to how circular economy fits into the response to and the future of Africa in the midst of this climate crisis. Tell us why, at a big picture level, this matters so much.
Thank you so much, James. And I am happy that I have been invited to be part of this. This discussion is very crucial at this stage in Africa, where we have the pandemic, then we have others which have been existing, including the climate change that has affected a wide section of the continent. First of all, we need to look at how at a regional level, with many UN agencies involved, how bodies like the African Union Commission, through AMSEN or African Development Bank, are taking on this issue of circularity so it can answer to how resilient climate change can be handled. First of all, we have to look at the countries which need to create enabling conditions and environment through review of the existing policies if they lack a response to climate change, put in place or encourage innovative designs, have a systematic way of putting in place integrated waste management, because these are the heart of how this can impact climate change through gas emissions and so on. Have a review of the existing institutional structures. These matter a lot, especially in the continent of Africa, where institutions must come together and answer and respond to the impacts of climate change. Have the private sector respond to green business development so that greening can be mainstreamed and integrated in their production processes, but also have a wish to produce green products. It's not only materials and so on that can cause impact, but if you have products which are not green, they end up impacting a lot on the response to climate change or its resilience, but also the supply chain. And then have climate smart interventions, and these are many. In Africa, we are only looking at agriculture mostly, but we have to have resilient infrastructure where our roads have to resist all these floods, all these various activities that impact on the infrastructure, so that we don't have to rebuild every other rainy season. We have to look at retooling and reskilling our people. They have to respond very carefully to the new challenges that are caused by the climate change. And it's up to us who are in the higher level of understanding and the appreciation that we go along with our people, the so-called leave no one behind, so that they also get the new tools, the new skills that they can use to answer this. More important, of course, is the political will. Countries have to come to the forefront, take on circularity as an answer to climate change, so that they are able to lead the people in the right direction. One important issue is about how we are managing the knowledge. Is it being spread out? Are we ignoring the indigenous knowledge? As our two colleagues, our ladies have said, circular economy is not new. It has been in Africa for a long time. But climate change has come in to disrupt lives and livelihoods of our people. So which would mean that having this indigenous knowledge as part of the action would help us to understand all these things. But also, we need behavior change. People must change their attitude. People must change their behavior on how they do things, so that we can all work together, including the private sector, and integrate circularity as an answer to the vagaries of climate change.
Yeah.
So
let me pick up there on the question.
Thank you.
Let me pick up there, because I think there's a good segue there on the question of driving behavior change. A lot of people will say that circular economy is all very well and good, but it does not pay the bills. And particularly, how do you finance the things that you need to undertake, or the activities you need to undertake in order to embrace a circular economy structure and agenda? Dr. Anthony Nyong, I'm going to come to you as Director of Climate Change and the Green Growth Department at the African Development Bank, which is also the host and anchor for the Africa Circular Economy Alliance. How do you respond to the question, well, how do we pay for this? How do we access the capital, the financial instruments that allow us to tangibly move from talk to investment and subsequently action and results? You are on mute, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so very much, James. And thanks to the organizers for inviting the African Development Bank to be a part of this. Yeah, that's a very good question because most things boil down to finance. But I can tell you that finance is not the ultimate. I'm going to talk about finance, but finance does not work in a vacuum. If you took money and threw at somebody, it won't get results, and so on. So the first thing we need to understand is that, one, there are policy constraints to enabling people to do certain things. If you walked into a country that does not have any policy, no strategy on the circular economy, you're going to struggle because you won't really have the support, the sovereign, the national support that would have. Secondly, the private sector has a role to play. We're going to listen to that today. And private sector determines where it goes to. It won't just go anywhere. Private capital is very timid. It doesn't just jump at you. It crawls out quietly when certain conditions are met. So this is very important for us to note. And even in the financial constraints where they exist, it's not equal. We've heard of women, they're largely sidelined. When you look at businesses in Africa, the micro scale have almost a split between men and women. But by the time you start going to medium scale, and large scale, the gap widens a lot because the women don't really have the same capacity to access these funds. Capacity, not that they can borrow, but the way they are looked at and the way their businesses are viewed. So when you think about that, I think finance then comes in gently. For us at the African Development Bank, we recognize, like some colleagues have said, let us get into action. We invest about $10 to $11 billion every year, largely to governments. And we are insisting that government must mainstream certain things into their projects. Climate change, 100% mainstream. Circular economy, yes, we're working on it. Green growth, 100% mainstream. That way, when any money goes to any country, we know that it's not going to really be funding things that will not be supporting the growth of that country. Then we have the private sector facility from there that also works and strengthens private sector. We have the MSC funds, SMSC funds, that also support small scale enterprise because their issues are different. But let me just pick two funds that I want to talk about. One is called the AFAWA, Affirmative Finance Action for Women in Africa. We have insisted that this should happen because we have seen how the women are not treated like the men. So this is an affirmative action. You don't benefit from that money if you're not a woman. And it's $300 million supporting women-owned businesses. That's all it does. And those women-owned businesses, if you check, almost every of them have to do with either production, agriculture, circular economy, something is there. And then we've also realized, like others have said, like Patrick mentioned, climate change is important. Our emissions is not from industrial processes. Africa's emission is not from energy, it's from land use practices. It's from agriculture, it's from deforestation. And when you look at those who work this land, they're largely women. But when it comes to solutions, they are excluded. And we think you cannot successfully address that issue of dealing with emissions when the people that deal with the land are not included. So we have, as part of that AFAWA, we've just initiated a project in Ghana, 20 million, on women in agriculture, basically to address issues of climate change. Then the youth are very important. Many of them don't have the collaterals. You walk into a bank, they tell you don't have collateral, you don't have bring your grandmother's certificate, bring your grandfather's primary one certificate to prove all manner of obstacles which the youth don't have. So we've provided a risk guarantee resource for them in one of our initiatives in the Youth Entrepreneurship and Innovation Fund. Provide money to the banks. You want them to give you collateral, this is what we are putting in. Give the youths that money because we trust them, we know they can deliver. you know, and we're seeing banks coming up now. In Ghana, the banks are now saying, look, despite your money, or in spite of your money, we now can give women directly because we have demonstrated, and they have demonstrated their credibility. Default rate is usually less than 1% compared to the men. So there are funds out there that could be made available. We have the Global Environment Facility. We're working with UNEP and UNDP to develop about $100 million thing. It's almost going through on persistent organic pollutants. This is chemicals, because it's also very important. You know, we have generators that are running.
Let me pick up there. Anthony, and we'll come back to some of this because I do want to bring some of the other voices in around the table. And a lot of what you discussed was that difficulty of small business entrepreneurs, many of whom, particularly in the informal sector, tend to be women, to access the capital they need to make the investments that they need to make to embrace the circular economy. Interestingly, Bruno Petracci, we're going to be talking to you as president of CocaCola Africa, which is an interesting company in that, on the one hand, one of the biggest, if not the biggest brand in the world, you know, big, deep supply chains all over the continent, but at the same time, very dependent on the connections to those informal traders to get that cold bottle of one beverage or another in the hands of someone in every village or nearly everywhere on the continent. How do you reflect upon the role of the private sector, particularly, you know, running one of the most complex supply chains on the continent? How do you think about the circular economy in your supply chain and the role and business case for the private sector in thinking about circular economy on the continent?
Thank you, James, and also thank to the Africa Circular Economy Alliance and all the organizers for the invitation. Let me start by saying that I'm very proud and yet very humbled to participate in such an inspiring conversation. At Coca-Cola, we believe that our packaging materials are a valuable resource, and we have the responsibility to ensure that they do not end up in the waste stream. This is the mindset that shaped a commitment launched in 2018 for a vision of a world without waste, which manifests itself into three commitments. Firstly, that we'll design our package to be 100% recyclable by 2025. We are currently already at 88%. Secondly, that at least 50% recycled material would be used in our package by 2030. We are currently at 20%, so a lot of work to do in the next decade. And lastly, that we'll collect and recycle every bottle for each one that we put in the market by 2030. We are at 60% globally. We know that Coca-Cola alone, or any company alone, cannot achieve these commitments. So building and leverage a multi-stakeholder partnership at a global, regional, and local level is going to be crucial. Having said that, the private sector should play and have been playing an important role in fostering the circular economy here in Africa. They are innovating, funding, and enabling the running of business that are engaged in the recovery and reuse of various materials. At Coca-Cola, our focus has been on enabling the collection and recycling of beverage packaging materials, and this goes beyond plastics. Let me give a couple of examples. I'm pleased to say that we have made great progress in the circularity of the returnable glass bottles. For instance, in Nigeria, we collect 98% of the returnable glass bottles. Plastics is still probably the greatest challenge, but here we also have made progress. For instance, in South Africa, we already collect and recycle 2/3 of the plastic bottles, and some of our plastic bottles already contain 15% of reused PET, so generating a circular economy. In order to achieve our objectives, we believe there is a set of things that need to be in place. Collaborating with peer companies. So some great initiatives are the PETCO initiative with an extended producer responsibility, which is present in South Africa. And then it was recently replicated to Kenya and Ethiopia. Similar programs in Nigeria called FBRA, or in Ghana, GRIP, or even in Ivory Coast, AIVP, have the same intent and can serve as models for us to move in the needle. We believe some enablers need to be in place for that to be true across the continent. The first being extended producers' responsibility schemes to ensure that every industry player contributes and bears its fair share of the responsibility for sustainable collection and recycling systems. The second is about the regional standards for food grade recycled plastics. I will cover later on that the ability to add more value to the plastic is a key component, and by having a regional standard of what we define as food grade will be critical. And last but not least, regional trade policies that allow for the import and export of plastic, allowing the smallest countries to reach scale and allowing the supply chain to be in place. Again, we know that resolving the plastic waste challenge is a journey, and there is still a long distance. I hope the 2 or 3 examples I provided serves as embryos for the discussion. We're certainly committed to the long run and working with all partners to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno. You touched on the importance of technological innovation as one of the levers that we have at our disposal in this journey, rethinking the fundamental design of the products that we use and in order to reduce, reuse, and recycle. Dr. Ndidi Edozian, you've held a number of hats. You are the chair of the Circular Economy Innovation Partnership, but you've also played a critical role in shaping the approach of Africa's largest industrial conglomerate, as well as been deeply engaged in the academic research and the conversations around the circular economy. There is this narrative that says in Africa, we talked about it, there is the Shuba Ndebe person on the one level, and it's all about waste. But how do we think about innovation more broadly, and the ways that we create greater value creation, greater value and impact opportunities for Africa in the circular?
Thank you very much, James. It's great to come and follow through on such great speeches before. I've always said sustainability and circular economy are actually a design challenge. So in other words, it's not enough to fix it after it's been set up. We actually have to think about it differently. And obviously, I think that one of the things that's come through very strongly today is that businesses and investment sit at the very center of it. And when we think about circularity, we actually have to think in terms of building a business case, putting the economics and the finance on the table in tandem with environmental, social, and economic factors. And we must build models that can scale, because once they can scale, they can attract more capital, and they also have to be diverse. So we've talked about youth and women in particular. We've talked about the fact that there are different tiers actually of business. So larger players, I'll speak to a project with the Growing Businesses Foundation, where working with a very large fast-moving consumer goods company, we work with 4,000 women entrepreneurs to take their goods to the bottom of the pyramid. Now, what's really fascinating right now is having that same dialogue with the entrepreneurs at the bottom of the pyramid, largely women, young people who tend to engage in tech and investment and innovation, and the large fast-moving consumer goods company who has an incentive to collect back their waste. And the fascinating conversation we're having is, how do we make this scale? And how do we make it stick? Now that raises three key things that I wanted to speak to today. One of them is the importance of culture. So when I say sustainability and circularity is a design challenge, from an African perspective, what I always remind myself and our stakeholders is that nature is an intuitive part of being African. So if I think about young people and birth, in my culture, when a child was born, the umbilical cord of that child was buried next to the most fertile tree. So you can imagine the connection between that tree and that child and that family. And I thought this, it came to mind when I was listening to Wanjira, whose mother started a revolution essentially simply by planting trees. So everything starts with a single step. The second is the question of impact. So we must begin to collect the data and measure the impact that we're having. So circularity in tandem with a move towards improved sustainability reporting and integrated reporting, where companies are measuring their impact, partly in terms of profit, but also in terms of measuring positive and negative externalities. How are we impacting society environmentally, socially, and economically? Again, from an African perspective, from the stories we've just heard, when you improve the environment, you improve people's livelihoods. Their societal status of women and youth is improved, because you realize that you must actually invest in these actors, because that is where innovation actually happens. And lastly is essentially just the question of innovation and technology, which is where the youth, because if we're able to really engage women at the bottom of the pyramid, young people and their technological inclinations, especially with the young demography that in Africa, and finally link that back up to the largest companies and the supply chains of those companies, so that we're really talking about scale that one can invest in, then really circular economy becomes mainstream. It doesn't become something that we hold, as a nice to have, and that way we're really beginning to build a new world, a new earth that we want to live in.
Thank you, Ndidi. You concluded on a powerful point around the systemic aspects of this challenge, right? There are multiple building blocks towards achieving a circular economy, and it's a complex and large system that we need to shift. And it strikes me that all of us around the world are getting a real lesson in systems thinking right now from the disruption that the COVID-19 pandemic has exercised. One microbe has literally brought so many interdependent systems to a grinding halt and created so many other secondary and tertiary crises. So my question to you, and maybe as a follow-up, is on the one hand, we are all now used to having the discussions about how much damage this pandemic has done on so many levels. Can you reflect a bit on to what degree does it create opportunities or a space as we think about the recovery and the rebuilding from this shock? What might this pandemic have taught us, or what kind of space might it have created for us going forward?
James, who was this question directed to?
It was to you. You still had the floor.
Okay,
it was a follow-up to you, Ndidi.
I think very, very clearly, this has opened the floor for partnership. We've always talked about partnership in theory, but what COVID did is we've had a lot more dialogue, and in a very strange way, because we're unable to actually convene physically, those transnational conversations have got to yield measurable, impactful action. So it's almost as if that pressure has increased. I'm seeing a lot more policy dialogue in collaboration with business and non-profit actors. So in other words, businesses are coming to the table and in a very interesting way are much more on the spot. I have seen the climate change movement, and I don't think it's just because Trump is making statements that are just inconceivable at the moment, really take a quantum leap. And what circularity has done, I mean, I love circular economy, not just because, you know, to me, it's intuitively African. It feeds into our culture. It's something that we can embrace and leapfrog, just like we did with GSM and mobile technology. It really is a huge opportunity, not by copycatting anybody else in the world, but really by going our own authentic path. It's a job creator. It's a way of using, reusing, upcycling material. But very, very importantly, I think, I hope, and I dare this panel actually to create an opportunity whereby business is working in collaboration with policymakers to create a framework in which we don't just have big business taking charge, but we're opening the door for innovation, whereby younger people and younger companies, and women in particular, who are geared in this space, lean on technology and lean on new different thinking in order to develop solutions that can key into large businesses' supply chain. So I'm looking at Bruno here in particular because Coca-Cola is such a large global actor, but also very present at the bottom of the pyramid. We would like to see that presence really show up in the way that you hold yourself accountable and responsible and what you report to the world. Because once you lead, if you're able to sign on that says we're working with 10 or 20,000 women at the bottom of the pyramid and youth, they suddenly gain access to a whole new amount of capital. And lastly, my last point is in the innovation space, which is what we've been working with Citra on since the WCEF 2019, in the innovation space, what really helps early stage companies, so angel investor I'm speaking now, gain access to capital, and there's a range of capital from angel to blended finance to equity, is access to demand. So if I, as an early stage company, know that I can sell my waste to Coca-Cola, who will pass it on to somebody who's building building blocks or reusing or upcycling, I can gain access to capital. And we need that linkage from government to big business, small business to the bottom of the pyramid in order to unleash capital, new business models, new innovation, and build the way that we do business in Africa.
I think there's some fantastic points there, Ndidi, around the different levers for that systemic change. And I think there's a natural segue to you, Bruno, sitting in the midst of one of the world's most complex supply chains. How is this disruption creating a shift in your incentives around thinking about some of these questions of sourcing and so on? And you alluded to some innovations in design and in production. Can you speak to how those are either being affected, accelerated, implemented in this period of pandemic crisis?
Absolutely, thank you. And I think it's the perfect segue. Let me share a couple of stories that I think might trigger interesting thoughts. The first being on design, and the different colors of PET might have very different values in terms of recycling. As an example, the green and the brown are much lower value. And one of the actions that we took recently is to move a Sprite away from the green bottle into a transparent bottle, because these ensure that the collectors will get their value. And this is also contributing to the brand. When you explain to consumers, although they have a first reaction that is negative because they are used to the green of Sprite, when you get them and explain what is happening, they are on board and they are supportive of the brand. Second story is around, once you collect and are about to reuse the PET, and I'll oversimplify the story, you have two paths, one around textile, and the second around food or beverages. The one around textile provides more certainty today, but is much less value than that of food and beverages. So during the COVID pandemic and during the lockdowns, the textile usage was practically impossible because it was shut down, whereas the food and beverage not only provided a higher value, but provided more continuity and more security of usage. The challenge across Africa is that still many of the countries don't have a regulatory framework in place that allows the usage of recycled PET into food and beverages. Last but not least, with regards to women empowerment, Coca-Cola launched 10 years ago a program called 5x20, which is the ambition to empower 5 million women globally by year 2020. We are on track to deliver that by end of the year. And of course, the African continent has more than its fair share, given the characteristics and the needs. And this empowerment has been primarily done through opportunities in circular economy and in trade management. So how to ensure that they can be entrepreneurs and manage their own business. So I hope this puts some lights into Ndidi's provocation. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Bruno. And you know, making that point around design very, very practical, I think, is very helpful, as well as highlighting the ways in which technological innovation, both going into products and then in what we do after we have those products, can play a role in driving the circular economy. Patrick, sitting at UNEP, I think there is a question around how are we more broadly from a policy and a broader systemic level working to bring new technological solutions and capabilities to empower enterprises and other actors working in the circular economy. In other words, how do we take the mental image of a worker in the circular economy in Africa away from just, and not to belittle it, it's a crucial component of it, the collection and management of waste, but there's also a ton of innovation, a ton of investment, a ton of new groundbreaking research and discovery to be done. How do we shift that narrative to be more inclusive of the broader picture?
Yeah, thank you, James. This is a very good question you have put forward. UNEP has moved away from only supporting policy and go to the ground to start implementing this policy framework. Working with over 3,000 small, medium, micro, small, and medium enterprises, there is a demonstration that actually not only circular economy, but technological innovations can be implemented. These 3,000 enterprises in 6 countries have shown that it is possible in Africa to make a change, not only in the production processes, but also in the business skills, in the change of the mindset, in the change of the attitude by the business owners, by the employees, by the entrepreneurs, that actually they can be made a difference. The main challenge now is how you can replicate these different green business strategies and spread it across the region, but also re-upscale what has been done successfully by these enterprises so that you are able to spread out the message of eco-innovation, the message of efficiencies in energy and water, the messages on sustainable trade, the messages on how you can start using labels and standards to promote your green products. But the biggest challenge of all now is what we term the green financing. Many of these enterprises are not the big ones that can use their own budgets to move these innovations, these interventions forward. But we need to have a mechanism on how these small enterprises who have identified the different green options to implement the different policy frameworks that have been put in place, but also through their interventions, they have caused demand for the countries to change policy so it can suit and promote this circularity, industrial symbiosis, integrated waste management, technological design, and so on. So on their own, they might not do it, but once you are to transform policy interventions put in place by countries, there is need to support these enterprises to see how they can achieve their dreams and join the bandwagon on how this circular economy can be put in place. And we have a program called Switch Africa Green, which is in the system to see how this can be promoted. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick. I think the conversation is starting to pick up, and as we move towards questions of how we drive to action, I think we will continue this conversation. We will take a brief interlude, and I'll throw it back to you, Tim, before we come back to more conversation with the panel, and importantly, drawing some questions and comments from our participants online and on the platform. But over to you, Tim, for an interlude, and then we will be right back into this crucial conversation.
Thank you, James. That was a really intriguing set of conversations, and I look forward to what's coming next. But what's happening now, Vera?
Yeah, well, now we are going to look more closely at one of many circular solutions that are scaling all over the world. Sitra has identified a list of 39 solutions that we just published, and you can find them on our website. Now, we will hear from Kenya, from Safi Organics, which you can find on also on our website. And Safi Organics enables sustainable agriculture through recyclable, locally produced fertilizers.
Using MIT design technology, Safi Organics helps farmers convert their crop residues, such as rice husks and bagasse, into a high-yielding, eco-friendly organic fertilizer in under 4 hours. Fertilizer supply is prone to disruptions, such as COVID-19. As Safi Organics, we are rewriting this story by making it possible for the bulk of fertilizers to be produced in local villages at an affordable price. Circular economy emulates nature, eliminating waste and creating value for the resources. This opens up new avenues for businesses. As a continent, we need to use our resources diligently to enable a continued growth of our economy.
Great. I think that goes to show that there are many opportunities in many different countries across Africa. We'll now move back to Nairobi and our panelists. And we're short on time here. We have about 6 minutes left, and hopefully the panelists can pick up on some of the questions that we have. For instance, the circular economy is actually a design challenge, and we need to rethink circular economy as a business case, and also how recycling innovations affect carbon emissions into the atmosphere. So hopefully you can help us answer those questions before we return to our last speaker in 6 minutes. Thank you.
I think it's important to keep in mind that this tight 30, 40-minute conversation is not going to cover everything about the circular economy in Africa or solve all of the questions or address all of the debates. There's a lot going on outside of the confines of this conversation that we need to take cognizance of and also build upon. Two things that I did want to note. There's a lot of high-level policy engagement as signified by some of the messages of support from, for example, the South African Ministry of the Environment, Barbara Creesy's office, and a statement that they shared on their program that is not the only part of the conversation. And I think I'll complex system
I believe we're experiencing some technical difficulties, but not to worry. We'll try and return briefly back to James if any way possible. But we'll just conduct a short poll to keep you online and engaged and awake. And I believe we are putting out the poll out now, and you will find the poll in the chat box and just press the vote once you've made your choice. And we would love to hear where you guys are located right now so that we will get more specific data, and as the WCEF is a global forum. So please do submit your vote, and I wonder whether we're getting data through already. Now, majority seems to be Europe, but I'm happy to say that also 21% of the vote so far and growing is from Africa. And indeed, that is extremely important. So please do keep clicking your vote button. So
it seems all the Australians and Kiwis are probably asleep already.
Hopefully.
Yeah, probably should be. And we're seeing.
Can we scroll down a bit? If we can see North America, I wonder whether we are getting votes from North America as well. So it's 68% for Europe, and North America 6%. Fair enough. Even one vote from South America. Yes. And but I am happy the Africa bit is growing. So please do. Put your votes through, and I think we will have our last keynote speaker online, and we are going to final remarks from Cabinet expert Laura Borisova from the Cabinet of the European Commissioner for International Partnerships. So welcome, Laura, and fantastic to have you here. And please tell us where you're located right now. Are you in Brussels?
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much. I'm in Brussels, indeed, in the building of the European Commission. Rainy weather in Brussels, but very much inspired by the discussion I've just heard. very interesting ideas. I've been taking a lot of notes that I'll take back with me to basically the ongoing work with our African partners on all these topics. Can you hear me? Okay, very good. So as you know, the summit that we've been planning between the African Union and the European Union unfortunately had to be postponed because, of course, of the COVID situation. We regret that. With the postponement of the summit, we had also to postpone a lot of very interesting events that we wanted to organize with our African partners. You know, for us, clearly that has been and is still the year of Africa, and we have been very much looking forward to this summit. But I'm optimistic. I believe that's gonna happen in the next few months, depending, of course, on the COVID situation. And in the meantime, as I said, I was very much encouraged to hear about the consistent emphasis that our panelists made on inclusion and sustainable economic models. That's clearly also our European Union vision for the recovery ahead. We definitely believe that promoting sustainable growth in Africa, while also tackling, of course, environment and climate crisis, must go hand in hand. That's the firm belief of my commissioner, who couldn't be with us today, Commissioner Urpilainen, but I'm also happy to send her greetings. Now, it's very clear that the opportunities, and those were described by our previous speakers, if we get it right, those opportunities are endless. And this vision is at the heart also of some of the flagship proposals that we put forward. Let me just cite a few. First, that's the new European Union Circular Economy Action Plan, which we see as an important pillar of the European Green Deal, which is calling very much for a tangible action at global level. Then we had our communication on a new EU-Africa partnership that we actually published back in March, just before the COVID hit. However, we believe that its partnerships proposed, its priorities are still very much valid, highlighting again the opportunities that are also arising from the circular economy for Africa's social and human development. So we want to make this vision clearly a reality by certainly enhancing our cooperation with our African partners, clearly including the private sector, all the financial institutions. In this regard, we very much welcome the many references to the partnerships, such as also the African Circular Economy Alliance, of course. Let me also say that I was very much encouraged by the fact that all our speakers mentioned inclusion, indeed, as instrumental for building broader support for the green recovery and the transition to sustainable economic models. Inclusion, of course, also referring to youth and women. That's again something we genuinely believe in here, and we try to definitely include this in all our initiatives. The European Green Deal, for instance, clearly acknowledges that the transition can only succeed if it's conducted in an inclusive and in a fair way. This is, as I said, very much the foundation of our cooperation on circular economy and more broadly sustainable growth with our African partners. We must definitely ensure that people benefit from this transition, that they actually get concrete benefits from this transition, and it's only then that we'll make real progress. Many examples have been mentioned by earlier speakers, and I was very happy to hear about those. Many of them I knew, others I didn't. The EU has quite some experience through programs such as, of course, Switch Africa Green, which clearly show what an inclusive green economy does for growth, decent jobs, but also for reducing poverty. For example, it is estimated that for every $1 million US investing in building energy efficiency retrofits, up to 14 direct jobs and up to 4 indirect jobs would be created. And that's an example also very dear to the heart of my commissioner. However, to give all equal opportunity and access to greener and decent jobs, we'll have to invest certainly in more education and more skills, and that has been also mentioned by previous speakers. Finally, inclusion in our view also means hearing again from all groups, from all stakeholders, including again women, including youth, and having them to contribute to policy making. And we are, from that point of view, also proud to support initiatives like the Green Economy Coalition, which helps civil society networks working on a fair and inclusive transition. In conclusion, I'm not sure I've been exhaustive, actually, because indeed the discussion has been very rich and very much inspiring. But let me reiterate on behalf clearly of the European Commission our commitment to an inclusive and circular economy in Africa, again, continuing to work on that with our partners. We also look forward to working with the United Nations, with all the financial institutions, the private sector, and of course the civil society. And it's only together that we can recover from this pandemic, promoting this inclusive, sustainable growth while taking on our planet's huge environmental challenges. We've recently come up with the concept of Team Europe. Team Europe doesn't mean just Eurocentric, but actually also working with all our member states, but also our global partners in the world. So on that, thank you very much for your attention and very willing also to continue this discussion. Thanks.
Thank you very much for the final remarks, Laura Borisova from the European Commission. And we are just going to be briefly returning to James for a wrap-up. So do please bear with us for the extra 2 minutes, so in order to finalize the Africa session. Thank you.
Thank you all in the studio, and apologies for the technical problems earlier. I think it's difficult to put a neat bow on a big conversation, but I think a few things I will call attention to. From our keynotes and from our panelists, we've heard about the fact that we are in the jaws of 4 major mega trends that demand action: a real reckoning with systems of inequality around the world, the pandemic and its effects, the realities of the resulting economic crisis, and the underlying and continuing and compounding mega climate crisis that is upon us. At the same time, that is a burning platform, but there's also a huge opportunity: $4.5 trillion worth of economic opportunity, 90 million jobs to be created in the circular economy, conservatively estimated. This is not something that is new culturally to Africa. Behaviorally and culturally, the circular economy is in us. However, we need to invest to scale up opportunities. We need to shift corporate behavior to embrace this approach to thinking about a planet with bounded resources and how we prosper within it. And we need to innovate. It is a matter for policy, and there are concrete actions out there being taken. So, for example, you think about the Ghanaian government's e-waste policy recently adopted and the systems that they're putting in place for that. And we need, finally, to really commit to a collective action around it. Now, as I said at the beginning of the conversation, it is very easy to hear this and say, well, okay, at least in Africa, they've also heard about this thing and check the box. But I do think that we find ourselves at a unique moment where, because of the pressures of the crisis we are in, as well as the opportunity ahead of us, there is a real opportunity to build new platforms and build new mechanisms to drive effective change. The Africa Circular Economy Alliance is one such platform hosted by the Africa Development Bank, and hopefully can play a role in tying some of these efforts and some of these mechanisms and activities together. But at the end of the day, none of this goes anywhere unless we commit, follow through, assess, and learn, and keep on improving in our approach towards making for a truly circular economy for the continent and the planet as a whole. Thank you all for your time and attention, and looking forward to treating this as the beginning of a conversation, and more importantly, the beginning of a series of actions rather than the end. All the best.
Thank you so much, James. I think one of the key words here has really been that of partnerships. And you said it, Laura Borisova said it, that we need all groups, all stakeholder. Bandiera Mathai made a connection to Japan with Motanai, excuse my pronunciation. So it's between all the way to Japan. And also, that's the story of the World Circular Economy Forum, which was in Yokohama in 2018.
That's right.
Yes. So it's really that finding it's partnerships and finding what works in a local context. And I think this also ties into another partnership that we should mention here, because Dr. Kategekwa mentioned in her keynote the African Development Bank. And I'm happy to announce that Sitra and the Finnish Ministry for Foreign Affairs have recently started working with the African Development Bank. So we're really keen to see how the societal transition pilots that have already been organized in Finland will be adapted and scaled in Africa. And speaking of partnerships, that is exactly the theme for our next session that is organized by the Platform for Accelerating the Circular Economy. So do join us in exactly 1 hour and 40 minutes.
Thank you.